All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for a conversation about what we can all do to address police brutality. And hopefully, by the end of this call, you can all feel inspired and also prepared to take action on this important issue. Before we jump in, I do have some housekeeping matters. We will be taking questions later in this webinar. So if you have questions as we're speaking, comments, whether it be about the content, the speakers, you can go ahead and use the chat function. So make sure, and I see that this was already put in the chat, that when you're submitting your questions and your comments, that you're sending it to all panelists and attendees. So when you get in the chat box, you'll notice that there's kind of like a scroll down option, and you can send messages to individual people, but make sure you're sending it to all panelists and attendees. My colleague, Bobby, who is behind the scenes running tech, thank you, Bobby, will also be monitoring the chat. So if you have any technical questions and you're having trouble with something, you can send him a private chat by, again, going through the scroll down option of the chat box and clicking his name, Bobby Trice. All right, let's get started with introductions. My name is Larissa Gil Sanhueza. I work at the Friends Committee on National Legislation, from now on FCNL, on the Young Adult Program team. Specifically, I run the Advocacy Corps program, which is our community organizing program. For those of you who don't know, the Friends Committee on National Legislation, FCNL, is a Quaker lobby that's located on Capitol Hill. We are a nonprofit organization that lobbies on a variety of issues, both from foreign policy and domestic policy. So I and the other people that you'll hear from today are part of, I guess you could say, like the grassroots branch of our organization. So like I said, I am being joined by two amazing organizers who will be co-hosting this webinar with me tonight. I'm very grateful to them for joining me for this conversation, and I'm gonna go ahead and let them introduce themselves now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Micajah, and I'm a Master's of Public Health student at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And I am also one of the organizers for a Black Lives Matter chapter on campus. I was a member of Advocacy Corps 2 years ago, and during my time, we focused on the demilitarization of police, and which is what we'll be talking about today.
Hi, cool cats and kittens. This is Jameelah Lewis tuning in from Las Vegas, Nevada, where I'm currently a local activist. I also work at the Rape Crisis Center here as the PREA coordinator, which stands for Prison Rape Elimination Act. And I recently just finished the Young Adults Program Advocacy Corps this past May. And what we focused on was gun violence prevention legislation. And I want to just thank you all for having me here. I'd love to continue the conversation and keep the energy going and get some action out. So I'll pass it back to Larissa. Thanks.
Thank you, Jameelah, and thank you, Micajah, for being here. Both of you, Micajah and Jameelah, bring years of experience organizing, not only on national issues with FCNL, but also local issues that have direct impact on their communities. And most recently, I've spoken with both of them about the desperate need to act on issues of police brutality. There are many, many ways to take action, as I'm sure you all know, and to stand in solidarity with the Black community as it has been impacted by police violence long before the events of the past few weeks. So why don't we go ahead and talk about what has happened in the past few weeks. It's been a little over a month now. On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd, a Black man from Minneapolis, Minnesota, was killed by a white police officer during an arrest. While 3 other officers stood by, a 4th knelt on George Floyd's neck for almost 9 minutes. The murder of George Floyd sparked massive protests and demonstrations, which further revealed the deeply rooted racism and white supremacy that exists in all aspects of our criminal justice system, including local law enforcement. Specifically, the protests reminded us and revealed to many in a very public way just how militarized the police is. Now we're gonna show you a quick video to help explain what we mean when we talk about the militarization of the police. That's a term that you're gonna hear a couple times in the next hour, so we wanna make sure that we're all understanding what we mean by that. And then we can dive into what we can all do about it. What are the options that we have to actually help demilitarize the police? So we are about to watch a video, like I said. I want to warn everyone that there are scenes taken from actual protests in this video from the last month or so that depict police violence. So we will be seeing scenes of police violence at protests in the last couple weeks. It's about 2.5 minutes. So if you need to look away from the screen, that's the timing that we'll have ahead of us. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to the video.
These Americans are protesting police brutality and racism against black communities, and they're being confronted by phalanxes of heavily armed police officers. And the US Defense Secretary referred to street corners like this as battle space, and the military hardware on display makes police units look like combat soldiers. Elite federal units, prison riot teams, military police, National Guard units, and local police. The militarization of America's police force stretches back to the 1970s. But in the post-9/11 era, it's reached a whole new level. Police forces have been militarized with equipment, training, and tactics forged in the country's wars abroad. Some of the gear comes from initiatives like the Pentagon's 1033 program, which allows the transfer of military-grade hardware to police. A handoff of surplus equipment at virtually no cost. A reflection of just how bloated the Pentagon budget is. Some of these tactics come from an urban warfare playbook, like this low-flying maneuver by a helicopter to disperse protesters. Increasingly, police officers are trained to look and conceive of themselves as warriors, always on alert, ready to terminate. And if high-level officials are also using the rhetoric of war,
you have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a bunch of jerks.
That's only accelerating a mindset that pushes police to act like soldiers. In this case, to respond to a nonviolent protest outside the White House as one might when trying to quell an urban insurgency. Systemic police brutality has long and disproportionately targeted black and minority communities, as these protests remind us. Sending the U.S. military into our streets to confront American protesters is another tragic consequence of hyper-militarization abroad. In America, if the police see themselves as soldiers and the neighborhoods they patrol as battle space, then ordinary American citizens are the enemy. Figuratively and literally, our foreign wars have come home.
If you watch this video, the scenes shown were completely horrifying. And I know I was here at the protest in Las Vegas, and while the police had military-grade weapons to use against protesters, we weren't even allowed to have bags. On May 29th, they brought out SWAT teams, they had out rifles, they had people posted on top of buildings, they had shields on, bulletproof vests, and so much more to protect themselves against a person like me. Specifically someone who is a Black woman who's going out there to exercise their First Amendment right. And so at that moment, I was definitely terrified, and I didn't know what to do but just to hope that I made it home that night. And unfortunately, I didn't. For many people of color, and specifically Black folk, being out in the streets is a matter of life and death, especially right now when we're putting our bodies and health at risk during a global pandemic to exercise our First Amendment rights. And out of all the police murder in this country, Black people make up 24% of the victims, but we only make up 13% of the population. I just want to go ahead and share with y'all another video here that will show about some of the mapping of some of these incidents that are happening in our communities and what the police look like in our communities. So I'm going to zip it and make space and let that video show what really is going on. And again, as Larissa said, if you are not wanting to see these images depicted, please go ahead and turn away, maybe listen to your favorite song for the next few minutes, but just try to decompress and come back for the rest.
Thank you. So just for a little bit more context about that video, it was just about a minute long, but all of the pictures that you saw there made it very clear just what the militarization of the police does look like. Those pictures were taken at protests in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. These took place 6 years ago when police murdered Michael Brown, an unarmed Black teenager. Now we can not only see clear examples of military grade weapons, but we can also see that the problem of a militarized police existed long before the recent protests and nothing has been done about it. So I'm gonna hand things back over to Jameelah so she can talk to us about the different roles that we can all play when addressing these problems.
Thank you so much, Larissa. So as Larissa said, there are many different roles that we can all partake in and should partake in our communities to uplift each other's voices. So for instance, protesting, and don't mind me playing with my little thing, but protesting can be the quickest and loudest way to have our voices heard when there's injustice. But in order to see real change, the movement needs to see all of us playing a different parts in our roles. So there are people who do media, specifically community media. While we do have our news outlets, looking towards the community to see what some of the videos and footage that they get is really important, as well as they capture what's really going on behind the scenes. And so we're able to really talk to people about how they're feeling. Also, another good way to be involved in community activism is taking space as a community healer, meaning that when these protests are happening and you see injustice in your community, some people aren't able to go out into the streets, but they are able to offer different kinds of ways to help people cope and heal from these situations. Also to help offer some clarity on what the next step should be. So all of these roles are really, really integral to really creating positive and the best change. But most of what we'll be talking about today is how we can make congressional action happen. And this can happen by talking to members of Congress and convincing them to pass legislation addressing the problem. Most importantly, it involves telling your story. All of these roles work together, and especially in the last couple of weeks in response to protests and the countless work that organizers have been doing, as Larissa said, to uplift the voices in their community. So Congress finally has a bill that begins to address the militarization of law enforcement and violence against Black people in this country. I'm going to, create space so we can hear a little bit from Micajah, and before that, we're gonna have another video play that really shows what some of this militarization in our communities look like. Thank you so much, and I'll pass the mic on to Micajah.
So we're actually going to watch the video later on, but the 1033 program is just one example of the way our law enforcement is being militarized. So police don't need grenades, they don't need armored weaponized drones, they don't need tanks. And then when I was in Advocacy Corps, we worked on limiting this program. So I focused on building coalitions to help different organizations with storytelling and realigning their mission with the sentiment of the demilitarization of law enforcement. And my priority was organizations meant to improve the quality of life of Black people. And also we extended our reach to people who are victims of police violence in general. And we even worked with different groups that could realign themselves, like March for Our Lives Las Vegas, for example. They adopted the demilitarization of law enforcement as part of their platform of anti-gun violence legislation. And during my time in the student government, I was a senator for the Division of Health Sciences, and I was able to introduce and pass legislation on behalf of all 30,000 plus undergraduate students at UNLV to stand for restrictions against the 1033 program. So now that legislation has just been introduced in Congress, isn't only about the 1033 program. The Justice in Policing Act, which was developed by Congressional Black Caucus and introduced in the House on June 8th, does a couple of things. One, it prohibits racial, religious, and discriminatory profiling, and it also raises the standard for the use of force and requires de-escalation techniques. It bans chokeholds, and it limits the 1033 program. So the Justice in Policing Act just passed the House last week. So it's time to put pressure on Senate and to also pass meaningful police reform legislation. So you can take action right now on the Justice in Policing Act by telling your legislatures to co-sponsor and support the bill. Larissa is about to share with you some easy ways you can do that, but I hope some of you share in the chat any ways that you've been taking action in any way, on any ideas that you all have. With so much being virtual right now, it's a great opportunity to be creative.
Thank you, Micajah. So I'm going to take you through a couple options that FCNL has for you to pretty easily take action on the Justice in Policing Act. So first, you can email your members of Congress. And what I'm gonna do is actually share my screen in order to show all of you how easy it is to do that. All right, so we're on Google right now. And so I'm gonna go in here and say fcnl.org/Congress. And we're here. So this is our action center. And you can see that in the top right-hand corner, it already says, hello, Larissa. And that's because I've already clicked through this link before and I've already kind of used this action center. But usually what it looks like in the top right-hand corner is kind of like log in. And you click on that. And whenever you click on it, you get the option of putting in your name and your address. And that way the system can actually tell you already who your senators are, in case you didn't already know, and your representative. But more importantly, they actually put all of their information into kind of a setup for you so that you can just click a button and send an email. So when you look to the kind of right-hand part of the screen, you see a couple different boxes and you see, tell Congress to do this, tell your senators to do this. So these are all of our options that you can take in order to, like I said, we are a multi-issue organization. You can go ahead and write to your members of Congress about many different things. Obviously, we will be focusing on the Justice in Policing Act and the action alert that we have created for this specific issue. So if I click on it, there we are. So we have on the left-hand side a quick explanation of what the Justice in Policing Act is and why it is that we are supporting it, why we want you to support it. or, to tell your representatives to support it. On the right, it says act now, select recipients. So you see both of my senators are there. Like I said, the system just did the work for me. And if I really wanted, I could just right in this moment hit submit selected letters and send the email. It's as easy as that. We did all the work for you, and hopefully the link is in the chat so you can click on that. It's mobile friendly, it's obviously laptop friendly, computer friendly, so you can just go ahead and basically speak to your members of Congress right at this moment while we're on the webinar. It's very easy, but I would encourage you to take just one extra minute, maybe even just 30 seconds, to go down here and take a look at the message. Just add a little bit of a personalized message. So right now, it's very clear why it is that I am asking Senator Casey to support this bill. But at some point I can write in there, "Dear Senator Casey, my name is Larissa. I am from this place in Pennsylvania, and I care about this issue for these reasons." It could be one sentence, it could be two sentences, and then down below, you can just leave the rest of the message. For a little bit of more context related to where we are at with the policy. So like Micajah said just a little bit ago, the Justice and Policing Act did just pass the House. And that's great, but now we need to put pressure on the Senate in order to do the same. Unfortunately, there has been pushback in the Senate on passing this legislation. There are members of the Senate that try to introduce their own legislation, the Justice Act, which Democrats blocked for coming up for debate. That piece of legislation, unfortunately, did not do nearly enough to address issues of police brutality. You can find more information about it on our website, but very important provisions that are accounted for in the Justice and Policing Act, such as banning chokeholds, were not accounted for in the Senate attempt at police reform legislation. So at this point, we are asking senators to support the Justice in Policing Act, but considering there is some tension in the Senate with different versions of what police reform could look like, we definitely want to be focusing on the language of the bill. So, okay, you don't want to pass this specific legislation. Well, whatever is passed needs to ban chokeholds. It needs to limit the 1033 program. It needs to end racial, religious, discriminatory profiling, etc. So you can see some of that language over here on the left. And that's all covered for you on the right in the message, but I wanted to give you all just a little more context on what exactly it is that you're lobbying for and why we have a sense of urgency now. This problem has existed in our country long before the events of this past month, like you've heard many of us say, but Congress has an interesting opportunity now to pass important and crucial legislation. So hopefully you all will be able to talk to your senators via this action alert setup that we have for you all. So I'm gonna stop sharing the screen because this is not the only way that you can take action on this issue. So I want to talk a little bit more about personalizing a message. The Congressional Management Foundation shows us that when constituents speak to their experiences and or their values, there is more potential to influence that legislator or staffer. We also call this telling your story. In this email, that's one way of kind of telling your story, making sure that you're being heard. But another way that you can do that is by lobbying. So what is lobbying exactly? It's having a conversation with your legislators about a policy, about something you want them to change, something you want them to support. And that is something that you can do now with some of our support. We do have resources to kind of get you all set up to do that as well. So you might be wondering, what exactly is my story? Thank you for creating this website for us and allowing us to speak to our representatives. Thank you for helping us with lobbying, but what is my story? I have no idea. That's a good question. So we definitely all have a story to tell. There's a reason that you got on this webinar. There's a reason that you care about this issue. And you might not be exactly sure what it is, but your story is very simply the answer to this question of why. So again, why do you care about the issue? This could be a direct experience, as in, this issue has personally affected you, and those are often the stories that first come to our minds. They are usually, the first things that come to us whenever we're trying to decide why we care about an issue, but they are not the only ways that you can frame your story. You can talk about the community that you come from. You might be representing your community in that moment. There is a power to being able to talk to your legislators that when we were in person, not every single person that's affected by an issue can fit into an office. And now that we do all of our lobbying on the phone, not all of the people that are affected by an issue can be on that phone call, unfortunately. So if you're there in that moment, you can view yourself as a representative of your community and taking advantage of the fact that you are having that conversation. So for example, your community could just be someone you really care about, like your family, your friends, your school, your church, your meeting, or your neighborhoods, your community of people that you live with, that you see every day, something related to your identity, a community related to your identity as well. But finally, you can talk from a place of values of justice and equity, for example. And I want you all to hear an example of what a story sounds like in the context of talking about policy. So I'll go ahead and share my story in a moment. But first, I want to say that we do really hope all of you will take action by either sending an email or lobbying with us, and you could do both. Like I said, lobbying is just talking to your legislators about an issue, and it's not difficult. I promise you, at the end of our time here, we are going to talk about how you can do that over the phone and how you can work with us on helping you get set up to actually have those conversations. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my story. Just so I can kind of model what it might sound like. And my story is one of values. So the values that kind of lead me to care about this issue. So I'm from Pennsylvania, like you all saw, and I'm just gonna go ahead and say that I'm talking to Senator Toomey about why he should support this legislation. So I can say, hi, Senator Toomey, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I want to talk about the police brutality that people of color and particularly Black people have had to face in this country. With hundreds of people out in the street protesting over the last 5 weeks, it is clear that we have needed police reform for a long time. And you have an opportunity now to support and pass policy that promotes equity and justice. Senator Toomey, I am asking you to support the Justice in Policing Act because people are dying at the hands of law enforcement, and we have the power to make changes in policy to address that problem. And scene. So there would be more than that in a lobby visit. You would probably explain more about who you are. I could say specifically where I come from in Pennsylvania, like a back and forth introduction stuff. And then you usually thank the legislator for something, even if it is just thank you for meeting with me today. That can kind of help set the tone of, we are not here to fight. We don't have to be hostile during this conversation. We are here to have a conversation and find some common ground and help solve a problem, right? And then you would kind of tell the story like I just told it, and kind of end on the ask and say, this is what I'm asking you to do. And that is pretty simple and clear: support the Justice in Policing Act. So like I said, lobbying can be really short and simple. The important parts are that you tell your story and that you have it clear what you are asking that legislator or office to do. there's a lot of information related to policy that you don't necessarily need to have in order to be an effective lobbyist. So Bobby is going to be putting, unless he already did so, a link in the chat where you can actually click on that link and fill out the survey saying that you are ready to virtually lobby. And what that means is that one of the members of the grassroots team, it could be me, it could be someone else, will reach out to you and say, you know, thank you for saying that you want to lobby. Let's get you set up either by, you know, actually scheduling the lobby visit for you or answering whatever other questions you might have about it. So it's pretty simple to do that. And like I said, we will give you the policy information that you need. We do have what we call a leave behind, which is just a one-page document with the basics of when you heard Micajah speaking about the Justice and Policing Act, we had a couple points up on the screen. Those are taken directly from the leave behind. So it's a very quick summary of what you're talking about. But the most important thing is that you are telling your story and that you're telling them what it is that you're doing, what it is that you're asking them to do, I mean. And when you click on the form, just one last thing, make sure that you indicate that you're interested in lobbying on criminal justice. So there's a couple options that will come up. And the first option is criminal justice. So I hope all of you watching will either send an email via our Action Center or sign up to talk to your legislators about this important issue, because there are so many ways to help build the movement, like Jameelah was saying earlier, and part of that is figuring out what role you can play. So at this point, I would love to invite either Micajah or Jameelah to kind of jump in and maybe give some thoughts about their story or the power of storytelling that you have seen as organizers when you go into offices and talk about these important issues.
Yeah, so thank you, Larissa. I want to say I really learned how to lobby. Sorry, I'm in my office again, but I really learned how to lobby from Micajah and being part of FCNL. She invited me to the first spring lobby weekend that I've ever attended with FCNL, and I learned so much. I realized that we came up in Nevada, we came up with our own routine of, you know, we go in there, we have a really, really powerful introduction. We let everyone introduce themselves, what school they go to, and their pronouns. And then as we go, we list off some statistics because we want to prove to them that we know what we're coming to talk about. What we also do is uplift some of the stories of people who are directly impacted by the specific issue that we're lobbying. So we've definitely gone to talk about immigration reform and demilitarize. I cannot say that right now, but we talked about the demilitarization of police, and it has been really impactful because we got to see from some people who were impacted specifically by ICE and how they wanted them defunded, but also how people who were affected by the local police here in our city of Las Vegas and how they were affected. And I think that our going to the offices and our legislators' office made them more comfortable to speak to us and come to us when they see issues in the community. Thus being why myself and Micajah do have pretty good networks and communication with different offices here in Las Vegas, specifically because we continuously go back to them and hold them accountable. It's not only a conversation that we're having, but we're asking them to do something. We're asking them to do their job and support Nevadans specifically, but wherever you are, ask them to support you. I know that someone also said that they were talking about lobbying administration and that they're part of student government. And so I definitely think that Micajah can speak towards what it's like being in student government and really having to advocate for your needs and necessities for student safety and security. Thank you.
Thank you, Jameelah. I definitely learned a lot about lobbying through my experience with FCNL and the power of storytelling. And there have been some very emotional moments and very vulnerable moments that have happened with legislatures that I believe reaffirm our humanity and dignity and let them know that we are very aware of our rights and very aware that they do represent us and that we do have a people power that we're going to assert. And so hearing that more people are engaging with that is always pleasant to hear. And so regarding student government, during my time, it really came down to, I guess, doing a little bit of research and working with the community to pass something that is meaningful and comprehensive to really target the way that this is affecting the community and which way it is. So I gathered a list of weapons that in general that colleges have transported through the 1033 program. I looked at legislation that affected people who were student immigrants, for example, and created a way to articulate how the very nature of police violence is going to affect our academic experience. And that is something that the education system in and of itself should care about because of its fundamental belief that people are entitled to an education. So how can we all focus the same on education when we just spent our summer dealing with police violence, with tanks and tear gas and all these things? That's how I'll be starting my master's program. So, and I have to go into that with the burden of knowing that all of that was in response specifically to us going into the streets and saying Black Lives Matter. I've grown up in my city for years. Like this is basically the only place I've ever grown up, but it wasn't until we all gathered together and started saying Black Lives Matter that the police opened fire on us as a peaceful protest. They're opening fire on people every day, and that just happens to affect a certain racial demographic more often because the nature of policing is built on an institution that has transgressed from slavery. And so we have to continue to do political education. We have to continue to educate ourselves and engage with this kind of work. And so I definitely challenge everyone to, even if it's as simple as watching the documentary 13th on Netflix or going on YouTube or entering it into the Google bar, why is policing a Black issue? And you'll find so many resources and knowledge. So I thank you all for giving me the time and space to share my story.
If it's possible, I'd also like to add on to what some of Micajah was saying, is that it's historical implications, right? And someone asked what in the group chat, because I'm trying to stay active in there, and when I turn off my camera, is why aren't we focusing on a white and Black issue? Because again, as they said, people of all ethnicities are getting killed by the police. So that's like asking, why is there a Black Lives Matter movement? Specifically because, again, and what was said was, we only make up 13% of the population in the United States as a whole. Here in Nevada, and specifically in Las Vegas, there's only about 8% of our people are Black. So when we're talking about why specifically police violence is affecting Black communities, it's because we make up little small portions of our community, yet we are targeted for police violence. And I think that's really something we have to talk about and unpack, is why are communities of color, specifically poor, disabled, LGBT communities of color, and again, Black communities, are being targeted by law enforcement. And I think that goes back into what Micajah was saying, is that it is institutionalized. It is part of, it's systematic, that we've seen this ever since Bacon's Rebellion, when they literally tried to separate the poor whites from the poor Blacks to add a separation. So instead of us being able to fight together, what they did was separate us and make poor white people patrol folk so that they could patrol Black communities. And that's where we see the police, the system of policing really be integrated. And so that's why when we talk about specifically policing happens and violence from police happen in Black communities, it's not only a right now issue. It hasn't been only since Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown issue. This has been a historical issue that we continuously deal with. And so I just want to reiterate some of what Micajah said is check out the movie 13th. Pick up the book, The New Jim Crow. And if you have not heard of Angela Davis, Google her. Google her, Google her, Google her, because she will talk about abolition movements and why specifically policing in communities is obsolete, that it doesn't work, and how we really need to work to protect our communities. So I want to thank Micajah for really speaking to that sentiment and really speaking to some of the struggles that specifically Black folk go through in their everyday lives.
Thank you both for that. I'm glad, Jameelah, that you mentioned someone in the chat, because I do want to go back into the chat and answer a couple more questions. Remember that that is a function that's there for you to ask more questions about what we've been discussing, either about what roles you can play, about what the speaker's experiences and experience in organizing, or if you just have any more comments about how you're taking action and some creative ways that you have found to advocate on this issue. So first, I will answer this question from Helen Fox asking, I'm concerned that if just legislation passes, local police departments will disregard it in one way or another, either through the culture of the department or through the police unions, etc. Is this legislation going to accomplish what we hope? That is a great question. So we are absolutely not trying to say that federal policy is the solution to this problem. This is a problem that needs to be addressed at the state and local levels as well. Federal policy, just like we were talking about all the different roles we can all play in social justice movements, obviously policy change can happen at all three of those levels, and when it comes to police brutality, it will have to happen at all three. Because we are a national organization, we are focusing on federal policy, and those are some of the resources that we have for you in terms of like fact sheets and stuff that I mentioned earlier. But these skills in advocating and telling your story, in expressing concern for this issue and talking about why it's important to address, that is transferable no matter who you're talking to, no matter what level of policy you're at. So we hope that you advocate at all levels of policy that you're able to. But like I said, we are focusing on federal just because we are a national organization. Thank you for bringing that up. There are solutions at every level and we will need all of them. There's also a question I see that's more specifically for Micajah. So asking about student government, saying we have been lobbying the administration to reform our own campus police institution. It says, this is from David Eldridge, beyond requesting increased cultural training and a larger focus on public safety through mental health instead of policing, are there other potential reforms unique to college police? Micajah, can you speak to any solutions that you may have found when you were working with student government?
Okay, I'm sorry. I have a guest. Can I just say my little story really quick, please? So in that sense, please put it down just really quick. I think that regarding that, it comes down to the level of like equipment that they have. So when they hear more training, I think that often like the police department, their ears perked up that it's like, well, we need more funding because we need more training, because we need more resources to do more things. And we're not trying to like increase the scope of what police do. We're trying to reduce the amount of police and police violence that we have. And so when we're talking about the 1033 program, they're able to access the resources from that program. They're able to access all of that military grade equipment. And so that is something that you can request administration to say that they'll denounce and not participate in that program. Or even a divestment from the local police department has been also an ask that's been made. One of the bigger things too that we could be asking administration that we've been thinking critically about here, and Jameelah, if you wanted to talk a little bit more about it, is through the investment in the prison industrial complex that colleges across the nation are having with the type of food industries that they're working with, including Aramark, which our university works with. And that's been a push that we have been trying to see passed. So I know that there's a lot of power within student government, but even though I'm not in student government anymore, we continue to build coalitions of people, of student groups, to meet with administration and continue to have those asks. And so we have to think about too, like on a major level, what kind of divestment from law enforcement we can ask our schools or demand our schools to have. And so I hope that answers the question a little bit more.
I think you did a great job, and hi Juju. I always get so excited to see him. So regarding Aramark and divesting from Aramark and companies like Sodexo in your universities is absolutely a great idea. Micajah knows a few years ago I did a major push at UNLV to specifically in their contract with Aramark, I don't eat there, I don't support them, I don't eat in the student union, because most of the time when these big companies like Aramark and Sodexo contract with our schools, that means that they're literally paying our school a massive amount of money to rent out spaces in our student unions, in our activity spaces like the Thomas and Mack, even though at UNLV, the Thomas and Mack is specifically under UNLV guidelines. There's still our whole student union, which has places like Taco Bell, they have like a sushi bar, they have Panda Express. All of those places then are contracted through Aramark so that they can then be in that space. The problem with Aramark is specifically that they're a big corporation that administers food to people who are incarcerated, to college students, high school students, and things like that. Not only Aramark, there is Sodexo, and there's another one I always forget about. But specifically what that does is the college gets a ton of money to let one of these companies rent out that space to other organizations. That means that company then gets a percentage of the funds that let's say Taco Bell makes in that space, and then Aramark gets that back, and they make tons of money. In the meantime, while all of this is happening, they're actually having riots about quality of food, cultural competency in their company, in colleges, and in jails and prisons, specifically around food. So when you're really thinking about divesting in the prison industrial complex, think about where your school's getting the money from. And look into all little things. Your school should have, you should have access to where your school's contracted to. It's a little bit hard to find, but you can literally find out all the contracts, and you can then write to your vice presidents, your presidents. I sent the email out to everybody in the school, every department, every teacher, every TA. I sent it out to everybody specifically so people would know more. Even though we did not get far, and unfortunately, UNLV signed another contract with Aramark, people are still pushing for this movement because they're still learning about it. And so I would just really start by taking the time to think about who your school's partnering with, and then educating everyone so that everyone's on the same page. And if you need, people can push that movement forward. So that's really what I've been able to do at UNLV, but not only myself. This movement has been continued on for about the last 2 years through other student organizations and student activists. So that would be my suggestion, but I'm so sorry for the long-winded answer.
Thank you, Jameelah. Thank you, Micajah. No, this is exactly why I asked you both to have this conversation with me. You both have a lot of experience in this work, and so thank you for sharing that knowledge with everyone. I see another question in the chat about education. So it says, from Maggie, education from early grade school needs reformed as well, so children grow up understanding our true history and learn to appreciate all cultures. Have you done any work on that? Without that long-term approach, any immediate action will only band-aid the issues, not remove them. So that's a great question. I I don't have anything to say about policy related to reforming education or taking a look at, you know, the curriculum from elementary school or junior high or high school or anything like that. Unfortunately, we have not, you know, again, many roles, many ways to see solutions to this problem. And that's one solution that we have not focused on. But what I will say is, yes, I want to validate that education, especially from an early age on these issues, is extremely important. So while we are not looking at policy related to that, I want to bring us back to what Jameelah was saying about education just, I don't know, like a couple minutes ago, saying that sometimes that's the first step. And for a lot of people, that is the first step in being able to address these problems and the institutionalized racism that has caused these problems, such as police brutality, but also, you know, the way that we kind of interact with those issues and the internalized racism that we might have, so, or that we do have. So I would say that it just comes back down to being able to educate yourself and talking to the young people, the children, the young adults in your life about these issues as much as you can, reading as much as you can, especially authors of color, Black authors. Jameelah mentioned Angela Davis. I would really emphasize that, yes, education is important, even if we are not talking about policy. There's a lot to be said about reading up on these issues to be able to have better conversation with your colleagues, with your peers, and deconstructing our racist structures through those conversations, or at least helping to deconstruct those structures. Another question came through about a recording of the webinar. So yes, there will be a recording available. I see that Bobby already answered the question in the chat, but I just want to let everyone know that that's one thing that you'll all get sent as a follow-up to the webinar. So we still have a couple more minutes. Let me make sure that we are not missing any questions or comments. But if you have any last minute questions or comments, this is the time to put them in the chat. And while I give it a couple more seconds, I will say thank you once more to Jameelah and Micajah for coming onto this webinar with me and having this important conversation, leading us through examples of how you can take action to address police brutality. Obviously, from things like talking to your legislators or focusing more within your own communities, there are many ways that you can play a role. And there will be an email sent out after all of this, like I said, with some follow-up, but I'll talk about that in just 1 second. Let me make sure that there's nothing more in the chat. Let's see, I think that there is one more thing. I see one question, let me pull it up. It says, when talking to Republican Congresspeople who don't like federal oversight of local and state law enforcement, what do you say if they ask about how the bill will enact this federal oversight? Okay, so like I said, we have a leaf behind that I can send around with more details about this, but as far as I'm aware, we are talking about federal policy, and state and local law enforcement has the ability to, you know, actually take action and pass policy on their own levels in order to address this at every level. So if you are asked about, you know, how will this affect state and local law enforcement, you can say, we are talking about federal policy. And if you get the argument that state and local law enforcement should be able to handle this on their own, you can say, yes, that is part of the solution. We do want them to start passing policy and addressing the problems on their own. But on top of that, we need this more overarching federal policy that handles, you know, for example, the 1033 program is a federal program that that gives these military-grade weapons to local law enforcement. So we are focusing on federal policy, but we are not diminishing the fact that state and local state and local policy needs to happen in order to address law enforcement at those levels as well. We got to do all of it. So with all of that said, I'm going to wrap us up and let you know that in this follow-up, we are going to be sending you a link to the recording of this webinar. We're also going to be sending you a link to the Action Center where you can actually send these emails that I referenced earlier. That was in the chat, but we will send it to you again. It will only take you 2 minutes, maybe 3 if you personalize the message. We will also have a link to set up a lobby visit with us. So all you have to do is say, yes, I'm interested, and then we will reach out to you and get started on that work with you. That's all you need to do is just say, yes, I'm interested. And then finally, there will be a link to that Leave Behind where, like I said earlier, we had some points up on the screen related to the Justice and Policing Act. All of those will be in this Leave Behind that's linked on the in the follow-up email. So with that said, I want to thank all of you so much for being here, and I'm going to go ahead and say that we're done with this conversation, but we are really hoping that you will reach out and actually lobby with us, take action in some other way, but overall, definitely do what you can to educate yourself and address police brutality at all levels in any way that you can. Thank you all so much.